Hey guys, I'm Carrie from Two Wheeling Tots.
And I'm Natalie.
And for the last several weeks, we have been testing out vertical hitch racks. And the two racks that we've been testing are the Alta Racks, which is right here, and the Velocirax, which is right here. And in this video, we are going to talk about all the differences of these two racks, because while they look pretty similar, and they are pretty similar, there's actually some really important differences that are going to help you determine which rack is right for your family. So before we dive into the differences, let's establish a few basic similarities. So both the Velocirax and the Alta Racks are vertical hitch racks, meaning they store bikes vertically rather than horizontally, which is how most other racks work. The primary advantage of any vertical rack is that they can carry 6 or 7 bikes, while horizontal racks cap out at 4. These two vertical bike racks store the bikes by their wheel. So the only contact is with this wheel basket on the tire and also on the rim. Okay, so additionally, both of these vertical hitch racks, they tilt forward so that when you're trying to load the bikes, those bike baskets or the tire baskets are much lower, making it a lot easier to get the bikes in. Additionally, that allows you to have rear hatch access, whether or not the bikes are loaded or unloaded. And the last basic similarity that we're going to cover actually covers all vertical hitch racks that we know of, is that they have a really slim profile when the bikes are not loaded. So basically you can keep this rack on your car most of the time and still have really great rear view access out of the back of your window. Okay, so now what you're waiting for is the differences between these two racks. How is the Alta Rack different than the Velocirax? Now, of course, there are hundreds of tiny little differences, but we've narrowed them down to the ones that we think really matter and that really should have the biggest effect on your purchase decision. So number one, Velocirax. The Velocirax is cheaper and more affordable than the Alta Rack. This 6 capacity rack is about $300 less expensive than the Alta Rack. So if you're on a budget, Velocirax might be the rack for you. Number two, bike capacity. While these are both 6 bike capacity racks, the Velocirax actually also comes in a 7 bike version. So if you're a family with 5 kids and 2 parents, a Velocirax might be the best rack for you. And last, lots of e-bikes. So the Alta Rack, even though it has a weight capacity of 300 pounds, they only recommend up to 2 e-bikes. Now the Velocirax has a weight capacity of 230, but they say you can load as many e-bikes on as you can fit within that weight capacity. Okay, so now onto the differences that make the Alta Rack a great choice and why you might want to consider it over the Velocirax. So we are a family-centered website, and so for us, riding with kids is a big deal. And finding a rack that can carry our 20-inch kids bikes is also a big deal. So both of these racks equally well carry 24-inch or 26-inch kids bikes. But the Alta Rack is much better at carrying a 20-inch kids bike. So Alta Racks actually has a specific bike basket that is made just for 20-inch kids bikes. Now Velocirax, they state that you can carry 20-inch bikes on this rack, sometimes with padding, but really what we found is that's a BMX bike, which is made very differently than a 20-inch kids bike. In our testing, we really didn't find that it was a good fit for a 20-inch kids bike, so unless you have a chance to test the rack out with your specific 20-inch kids bike before you purchase, we would say probably don't count on it being a solution for a 20-inch kids bike. If you need 20-inch, Alta's your best bet. So the next difference is with ground clearance. Now, Alta Rack's hitch angles up at a much steeper angle from the ground than the Velocirax, which is at a 90-degree angle. You're much more likely to bottom out on a low hitch vehicle on the Velocirax versus we never bottomed out on our lower hitch vehicles with the Alta Rack. Additionally, the Alta Rack's crossbar has 3 different height settings. So for some reason you did have an issue with bottoming out, like with an extra large 29er on the tire at the bottom, you could raise that crossbar to increase the ground clearance of the bikes from the ground. Lowering the Alta's top crossbar is also a great option for vehicles with higher hitches, especially those over 20 inches. For reference, our Honda Pilot and Toyota Highlander shown throughout this video do not have high hitches, and both have hitch heights that are about 16 inches. The problem with high hitch cars is that it raises the entire rack in relation to the ground, making them harder to load, unload, as well as push back up once they're tilted. If you're adventuring out with a bunch of tall people with good upper body strength, the total height of the rack won't likely be a big problem. But for us moms who regularly ride with the kids and without dad, it can quickly become an issue. We put these racks to the test on 2 vehicles with higher hitches, a Ford Expedition and a Land Cruiser. On the Expedition, with a 20 1/4 inch hitch height, are 2 teenagers, heights 5'7" and 5'8", were able to push the Velocirax up with a lot of effort. On the Land Cruiser with a 25-inch hitch height, it took 2 teenagers and mom to get that Velocirax in vertical position. Now the Alta solves this problem by allowing you to lower the top bar around 6 inches. This makes access for loading, unloading, and pushing the rack back up into vertical position considerably easier. Even on the Land Cruiser, 5'10" mom was able to push the fully loaded Alta rack back into vertical position by herself. Now the last big difference that we want to mention between these two is that Alta racks are made in the USA. Now they're both designed in Utah, but Alta is the only one that is actually made here. So if purchasing made in the USA is important to you, Alta rack is the rack for you. Okay, so those are all the big differences. Now there's several smaller differences that we do want to mention because you may have read about them or heard about them in another review, and we want to show them to you so that you can actually see what is different. And we don't think that they really should play much of a role in your decision between these two racks, but at the end of the day, it's up to you. We're going to show them to you and you decide. So first thing is you probably have heard of Velocirax's hydraulic dampening system. Now that's kind of like the biggest deal about the Velocirax, and everybody talks about it, and it actually is really cool. So what it does is when you release the lever to lower the rack, it lowers the rack slowly. So even though there could be up to 230 pounds of bikes on this, it's never going to come crashing down on you, which I clearly don't want 200 plus pounds of bikes crashing on me, right? So that's a great advantage. However, there actually are 2 drawbacks, and this is why we're saying that this dampening system probably shouldn't factor into your decision too much, because to us the drawbacks kind of make it a wash. So the problem with the dampening system is that the hydraulics only help on the way down. They don't help on the way up. They actually kind of work against you on the way up. So pushing this loaded rack up is actually a lot more difficult than pushing this up, because that dampening system is working against you when you're pushing it up. The other thing is, when this rack is not loaded and you are trying to lower the rack, the dampening system works against you there as well. So because there's that dampener that's gonna, prevent the bikes from crashing on you, the rack actually won't lower when it's unloaded unless you're pulling on the rack, and even then, it's a pretty slow process. So not the end of the world, but we just wanted to make sure that you understood that while that hydraulic dampening system is a really cool feature, it also does have a few drawbacks. Okay, so the next feature we want to talk about is bike spacing. So Alta racks have this really cool feature where you can actually shift the baskets to the left and right to make minor adjustments for spacing. But at the end of the day, on these 6 capacity racks, we were able to fit the same load of bikes on both racks without contact of bikes, no problem. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the way that these bikes are actually tied down by their wheel. So the wheel straps are very different on the Velocirax and the Alta rack. They are very thick and tight on the Velocirax, and they're actually pretty hard to pull and to release. They certainly work great, but just FYI. Now the Alta racks are much thinner and they're much easier to pull and tie down. However, they're a lot longer, and when their rack is unloaded, they kind of just flap in the wind a lot. We actually take them off the rack and keep them in the car because it bugs us a little bit. So at the end of the day, both of the straps work just great. Neither is perfect, but it really shouldn't be a determining factor in your purchase. Okay, so the last difference that we're going to talk about should not matter to most people. So this is weight capacity. So remember, 300-pound weight capacity, 230. So the 300-pound weight capacity really does speak to the overall quality and build of the Alta rack, but at the end of the day, you're probably never going to put 300 pounds of bikes on it. So remember, Alta racks only recommends up to 2 e-bikes, whereas Velocirax says you can put as many e-bikes on there as you want as long as it stays under that 230 pounds. So realistically, if you need to carry a lot of e-bikes, despite this one having a higher weight capacity, you're probably going to want to go with the Velocirax. Now, of course, unless you're hauling fat bikes, then you might want that 300-pound weight capacity. So at the end of the day, both the Velocirax and the Alta rack are exceptional vertical hitch racks. So which one is right for you? We determined that it really comes down to a couple of specific questions. Number 1, do you need to haul 7 bikes? Velocirax. Are you on a budget? Velocirax. Do you need to carry a lot of e-bikes? Velocirax. Do you need to carry a 20-inch kids bike? Alta rack. Are you worried about the rack bottoming out on a low hitch vehicle? Alta rack. What about high hitch vehicles? Are you worried about those baskets being too high? The Alta rack, you can lower them, so you might want to go with the Alta rack. We hope this review was helpful. If you have any additional questions about differences between the two, please make sure to comment below.